Who? Most people think reverse psychology is a cute trick, a childish little, don't do it, that magically makes someone do it. But that's the toy version. Who? The version you hear in pop self-help and laugh about like it's harmless. The real version is darker and more precise, because reverse psychology isn't persuasion, it's frame control. Who? It's the silent architecture that moves someone's choices while making them feel like they move themselves. And that's why it's so dangerous. Because when it works, it doesn't feel like control, it feels like freedom, like you decided, like you chose, like you wanted to do it. And the terrifying truth is you've been on the receiving end of this your entire life. You've apologized when you weren't wrong, because someone made the room feel like a courtroom. You've chased attention because someone made warmth scarce. You've over-explained because someone planted a subtle accusation into the air and your nervous system panicked. And if you don't understand how this works, you don't just lose arguments, you lose years. Because power games aren't mostly fought with force, they're fought with invisible rules. And Machiavelli understood this long before the modern world tried to sanitize human nature. He didn't use the phrase reverse psychology, but he mapped the terrain: status, fear, vanity, self-interest, appearance, and the brutal fact that people rarely move from truth. They move from pressure, from social threat, from ego protection, from the need to feel in control. And reverse psychology weaponizes that need. So yes, use with caution, because these laws are scalpels, and a scalpel can cut out disease or cut through an artery. And if your intention is exploitation, you don't become powerful, you become a parasite, and parasites always get hunted eventually. The only sustainable version of power is sovereignty. Control over yourself, clarity in your boundaries, and mastery over the hooks people try to sink into you. So in this voiceover, we're going to walk through 13 Machiavellian laws of reverse psychology. What they are, how you'll see them in real life, and most importantly, how to protect yourself from them. Because the highest level is not manipulating others. It's becoming someone who cannot be manipulated, and we begin with the first law. The root law, the law that sits underneath every other move like bedrock under a city. Control the frame, or you will live inside someone else's. Every conversation has an invisible structure. A hidden hierarchy, a judge and a defendant, a person who sets the rules and a person who reacts inside those rules. And reverse psychology begins by forcing you into the other person's courtroom without you noticing the doors closed behind you. You see it when someone doesn't answer your point, but labels your state. Relax. Why are you so emotional? Notice what happened. Your argument evaporated, and suddenly you're defending your tone, your face, your mood, which means you're no longer discussing reality. You're defending your right to speak. And the moment you accept that, you've already conceded authority. Machiavelli would call that losing the frame, because the frame is the lens that decides what matters. And whoever decides what matters decides who wins. So the counter is not loudness, not aggression, not a desperate pile of explanations. It's calm refusal, disciplined refusal. The kind of calm that makes people question whether their attack even landed. Phrases like, "That's an interesting way to frame it," or "I'm not discussing it in those terms," or "Let's stick to the facts." Because reverse psychology feeds on emotional chaos and frame control is emotional discipline. And here's the first protection rule you tattoo onto your mind. If someone keeps shifting the topic away from the issue and toward your character, your motives, your sanity, your tone, you're not in a discussion, you're in a power game. Now the second law, the one that turns your identity into a leash. The reverse label. Humans become what they are accused of when they fear the accusation might be true. And this is why labels work as steering wheels. Someone says, "You're selfish," and your nervous system flares. You start donating your energy like you're paying a fine. Who? You begin performing generosity, not because it's your value, but because you're running from shame, and now they own your behavior through one word. Who? Reverse psychology loves labels because labels bypass logic and punch straight into the ego's survival system. So the antidote is brutal: don't fight labels, don't worship labels. Who? Don't chase labels. If it's false, it's noise. If it's partially true, you fix it privately. But you never let someone's label become your collar. Who? And calm looks like a simple, okay, or if that's your perception. And then silence, because silence is the one response that doesn't feed the label with oxygen. Who? And here's your second protection rule. Anyone who labels you repeatedly is trying to shape you. It's domination disguised as truth. Now the third law. Who? The one that turns adults into addicts. Scarcity creates chasing. Reverse psychology loves scarcity because scarcity hijacks the brain. It makes attention feel like water in a desert. Who? And people will do humiliating things for a sip. Some people pull back, go cold, disappear, then return with warmth. Not because they're busy. Who? But because they're training your nervous system like a slot machine trains gamblers. And Machiavelli didn't need modern behavioral science to understand this. Who? People chase what they can't predict because unpredictability feels like value and predictability feels like safety. And insecure minds confuse value with danger. The defense is dignity. Who? Consistency and the willingness to let a cold person stay cold. If someone's warmth increases only after you begin pulling away, you're not in connection, you're in control warfare. Who? And that's your third protection rule. Now the fourth law, the provocation that turns you into a performing monkey. Make the other person prove it. You really think you can do that? You sure you're capable? You're not the type who follows through, and you think it's doubt, but it's bait. Who? It's a hook that drags you into performance mode, and now your decisions aren't chosen by your values. They're chosen by your ego's need to look capable. Who? Which is why people burn years proving things to people who will never be satisfied, because satisfaction was never the goal, control was. So the Machiavellian counter is execution without commentary. Who? Will see, or noted. And then you go quiet and do what you do, because results end conversations that words keep alive. And here's your protection rule. Who? Anyone who makes you feel like you must prove your worth is positioning themselves above you. Now the fifth law, the menu: control options, control outcomes. If I control what choices you see. Who? I control what you choose, and the simplest trick is presenting 2 doors when there are 5. Do you want A or B? And you pick one and feel decisive, not realizing you just accepted their reality as the whole map. Reverse psychology doesn't force you. It curates your world, and the defense is slow thinking, questions that widen the rooms. Who? What are the other options? What happens if I choose none? Who benefits most from each choice? Because when you feel rushed, you are easiest to control. Who? And Machiavelli's courts were full of rushed decisions disguised as duty. Sixth law, praise as a trap. Praise isn't always love. Sometimes it's a collar. Who? You're the only one who understands me. You're so responsible. You're such a strong person. And watch how flattering identities become obligations. If you accept the identity, who, you start acting to protect it, and now they can steer you by praising the trait they want to exploit. This is how strong people become unpaid therapists. Who? How responsible people become scapegoats. How kind people become doormats, because they're not protecting their boundaries, they're protecting a label. Who? So the counter is to accept praise lightly without merging with it. I appreciate that. Not, yes, that's who I am. Because the moment praise makes you fearful of disappointing them. Who? It's not praise anymore, it's control, and that's your protection rule. Seventh law, guilt. The cheapest remote control in the world. If you cared, who? You would. If you were a good person, you would. If you were loyal, you would. And notice how quickly your spine turns to water when morality is used like a weapon. Who? This is not persuasion, it's moral blackmail, virtue as camouflage for dominance. Who? And Machiavelli would not be shocked by it because he understood that people use morality when force would make them look evil. The defense is to refuse the moral courtroom and return to boundaries. No, I'm not doing that. That doesn't work for me. And then stop talking, because every extra sentence is a handle they can grab. And here's your protection rule. Who? Anyone who repeatedly questions your goodness is trying to purchase your behavior with guilt. 8th law, the calm gaslight. Who? One of the nastiest reverse tactics is making you defend your sanity instead of their behavior. You're imagining things. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. And it works because most people fear being seen as irrational more than they fear being mistreated. Who? So they abandon their own perception to look reasonable. And that's the trade manipulators want your reality for their comfort. Who? The defense is not to debate your reality with someone committed to denying it. It's to state facts, name patterns, and if needed, exit the conversation entirely. Who? Because the person who benefits from your confusion is not your ally. 9th law, withdrawal as punishment. Silence can be power. But some people use silence as a whip after you set a boundary. Who? They go cold, not to calm down, but to train you to chase, apologize, beg, and if their withdrawal consistently follows your self-respect, it's not space. It's conditioning. Who? And the defense is to refuse the chase and name the standard once, calmly. I'm open to talking when it's respectful and direct, and then disengage. Who? Because you don't negotiate with punishment, you starve it. 10th law, the reverse challenge. Who? You won't do it. You don't have the discipline. You're not built for that. Designed to activate pride. Who? And pride is the easiest emotion to weaponize because it disguises itself as strength. Pride makes you accept bad deals to prove something. Pride makes you walk into traps with your chest out. Who? And the counter is to remove the fuel, maybe, then silence, because real power doesn't need to prove itself to provocations. 11th law, the help me hook. Who? Some people keep you close by being perpetually helpless, and the reverse psychology is subtle. They make leaving feel like cruelty, boundaries feel like abandonment. Who? And you become their rescuer, not because you're evil, but because you're compassionate. And compassion without structure becomes captivity. The defense is compassion with limits. Help once. Who? Don't become the system. Don't become the oxygen tank they refuse to replace. 12th law, the social story. Create a narrative where you're the villain if you don't comply. Who? They threaten your reputation without saying it out loud. Who? You changed. You're cold now. You don't care anymore. And now your behavior is being purchased with fear of how you'll look. Who? The defense is to accept being misunderstood by people committed to misunderstanding you and protect your integrity privately. Who? Because if your fear is, how will I look? You've already been moved. And finally, the 13th law, the one that collapses every other tactic like a house of cards, radical autonomy. Who? Reverse psychology only works on you when you need something: approval, attention, belonging, validation, status. And the more you need, the more predictable you become. Who? And predictability is control. Radical autonomy doesn't mean isolation. It means you can be connected without being dependent, loved without being owned, respected without being feared. Who? And when you don't need to be liked, you stop being trapped by social pressure. When you don't need to be understood, you stop explaining yourself into weakness. Who? When you don't need immediate comfort, you stop trading your future for a short-term hit. And ironically, that's when people treat you differently. Not because you became cruel, who? But because you became solid, And that's the real point of these laws, not to become manipulative, but to become unmovable, to see the hook, feel the pull, and refuse to bite. Who? To stop leaking your insecurity into your words, to stop being steered by guilt, scarcity, labels, and provocation. Who? Because once you see the strings, you start noticing how many relationships depended on you being easy to control. And some people won't like the new version of you. Who? Because they benefited from the old version. But sovereignty has a price. And the price is that you stop negotiating your self-respect with anyone. Use these laws with caution. Who? Because power is not a toy. And if this made you more aware, more grounded, harder to control, then subscribe, not to support a channel. Who? But to make a contract with yourself that you're done being a piece on someone else's board. And now we go deeper, because if you only understand these laws intellectually, who? You'll still get caught emotionally, and reverse psychology doesn't win because it's clever. It wins because it hijacks your nervous system before your logic even wakes up. Who? So we have to talk about the hidden engine behind every tactic. Your need to be liked, your need to be seen as good, your need to be understood, your need to feel chosen, your need to avoid conflict, your need to prove yourself. And the moment someone senses a need, they can steer you with it like a handle on a suitcase. Who? This is why the strongest defense is not a better comeback. It's a stronger inner architecture, because the person with a stable center can hear bait and feel nothing. Who? While the person with a hungry ego will run straight toward the hook and call it love or ambition or loyalty. So here's the shift. Who? Stop viewing reverse psychology as something people do to you and start viewing it as something your psyche participates in when it's unregulated. Who? Because manipulation requires two people, the manipulator and the part of you that wants the manipulation to end with comfort. That's why the first battlefield is internal. When someone throws a frame at you, your body wants to defend. When someone withdraws warmth, your body wants to chase. When someone drops a label, your body wants to perform the opposite. Who? When someone uses guilt, your body wants to submit so the shame stops. And the question becomes simple and brutal. Can you tolerate the discomfort of not reacting? Who? Can you sit inside the fire without begging for water? Because every time you react to stop discomfort, you teach the other person what button works on you. And once a button is proven, who? It will be pressed again, which is why strong people look mysterious to weak minds. They aren't mysterious. They're just not leak-prone. They don't broadcast their triggers. They don't negotiate their boundaries. They don't plead for correct interpretation. And that brings us to the most overlooked principle of all. Silence is not empty. Silence is a wall. Who? Silence is a mirror. Silence is a test. And when someone is using reverse psychology on you, they are often relying on one assumption: that you will fill the gap, that you will explain. Who? That you will soften, that you will chase, that you will rescue, that you will overtalk, that you will offer them something they didn't earn. So the moment you don't, and the moment you pause and let the air go still, their tactic starts collapsing, because tactics require predictable reactions. Now watch how this plays out in real life. Someone says, "Wow, who? You're really sensitive." And the average person scrambles, "No, I'm not." Who? "I'm just." And in that scramble, they've accepted the premise that sensitivity is shameful and that the other person has authority to define them. Who? But the sovereign response is almost offensively simple. Okay. And then you continue as if nothing was decided, because nothing was. It was just noise. Someone says, "Who? If you cared, you'd do this." And the average person panics because their identity is attached to being good. So they complain to remove the moral stain. But the sovereign response is, "Who? I hear you," followed by, "No," because hearing is not agreeing and empathy is not surrender. And that's the level you're building. Compassion without compliance. Who? Someone goes cold after you set a boundary, and the average person collapses into chasing behavior because the nervous system craves resolution. Who? But the sovereign response is to let the cold exist without running into it, because chasing is the oxygen of punishment, and you don't feed what tries to train you. Who? Someone tries the menu trick, do A or B, and the average person chooses quickly because they fear looking difficult. But the sovereign response is, there's also option C. Who? I choose neither, because your autonomy is the one thing reverse psychology cannot survive. And here's the uncomfortable truth. When you start doing this, some people will escalate. Who? Not because you harmed them, but because you removed their access to your nervous system. And access is what they were used to. You will see them use bigger labels, sharper guilt, longer silences, sudden affection, fake confusion, spiritual language, moral language, victim language, anything to drag you back into reaction. Who? And this is where most people fail, because they mistake escalation for proof they were wrong. But it's actually proof the boundary is working. A locked door makes thieves angry. Who? Not because the door is evil, but because it ends their convenience. And this is why we keep returning to that final law, radical autonomy. Because autonomy is not just a mindset, it's a practice. Who? You stop replying instantly. You stop explaining the obvious. You stop volunteering your plans. You stop donating your peace to arguments that don't matter. Who? You stop letting other people's urgency become your emergency. And every time you do, your system rewires, your self-respect strengthens, and you become harder to move without consent. Who? And let's be clear, none of this means you become cold or cruel. It means you become selective, because selective disclosure is safety, selective access is sanity, selective commitment is power. Who? And the irony is this: when you stop being easily controlled, you also stop attracting people who need control, because those people sense the lack of handles on you and they drift away. Who? And what remains are relationships that don't require tactics to survive. So if you want the real payoff of understanding reverse psychology, who? It's not that you'll start using it. It's that you'll start recognizing the moment a conversation stops being about truth and starts being about leverage. Who? And you'll exit the trap before it closes, because your goal isn't to win every interaction. Your goal is to refuse the ones designed to drain you. Who? And that is the quiet power Machiavelli would respect, not the loud dominance of a bully, but the disciplined sovereignty of a mind that cannot be baited, cannot be guilted, cannot be rushed. Who? Cannot be shamed into compliance, cannot be seduced into self-betrayal, because once you become that person, reverse psychology loses its magic. Who? And all that remains is what it always was beneath the performance. Someone trying to move you without earning you, and you finally have the clarity to say, without anger and without